In the bitter cold of January 1879, 32 men crossed the threshold between the known world and the frozen wilderness that stretched endlessly beyond Halifax, Nova Scotia. They carried with them the weight of scientific ambition, government mandate, and the unwavering belief that man could conquer any frontier. None of them would ever return. Their bodies were never found. Their fate remains to this day one of the most haunting mysteries in North American exploration history. The Halifax Expedition represents more than just another tale of men lost to the unforgiving Canadian winter. It stands as a testament to human hubris, a chilling reminder of forces beyond our understanding, and perhaps most disturbing of all, evidence that some places on Earth are meant to remain untouched by human ambition. What happened to these 32 souls in the weeks following their departure has become the subject of whispered legends, buried government documents, and a mystery that has haunted historians for over a century. On the morning of January 15, 1879, witnesses watched as the expedition's dog sleds disappeared into the white expanse north of Halifax. The men were well-equipped, experienced, and confident in their mission. By March, when the spring thaw should have brought news of their progress, only silence returned from the north. The ice, it seemed, had swallowed them whole. Halifax in 1879 stood as a testament to British colonial ambition in the New World. The city had weathered the American Revolution, survived the War of 1812, and emerged as a crucial maritime hub connecting Europe to the vast Canadian territories. Its population of nearly 30,000 souls lived in the shadow of the great naval dockyards, where the thunder of ship construction mingled with the cries of merchants hawking goods from across the Atlantic. The winter of 1878-1879 had been particularly harsh, even by Halifax standards. Ice formed earlier than usual, extending the frozen grip of the North Atlantic deep into the harbour. Old-timers spoke in hushed tones of similar winters from decades past, when ships remained trapped in ice for months and supplies dwindled to dangerous levels. Yet it was precisely this harsh climate that drew the attention of government officials in Ottawa. The Canadian Pacific Railway was still years from completion, and the government faced mounting pressure to establish northern trade routes that could bypass American territory entirely. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald's administration had commissioned several surveys of the northern territories, seeking viable paths for both railway expansion and resource extraction. Coal deposits had been reported in the region beyond Halifax, along with rumors of precious metals that could fuel the young nation's economic independence. The Department of the Interior had established the Northern Survey Division specifically to map these uncharted territories. Unlike the more famous expeditions to the Arctic archipelago, these mainland surveys received little public attention, but carried equal importance in government circles. The Halifax Expedition was designated as Survey Mission N47, tasked with mapping the inland route north of Halifax and assessing the feasibility of establishing permanent outposts in the region. What made the Halifax mission particularly urgent was the growing influence of American mining interests in Nova Scotia. Boston-based companies had begun purchasing mineral rights throughout the maritime provinces, and there were concerns that valuable northern territories might fall under foreign control if not properly surveyed and claimed. The expedition was therefore classified under the Colonial Security Act, giving it both governmental backing and a veil of secrecy that would later complicate rescue efforts. The political climate of 1879 also reflected a broader cultural shift towards scientific rationalism. Charles Darwin's theories had gained acceptance among educated circles, and there was a prevailing belief that systematic observation and measurement could unlock the secrets of any frontier. The men selected for the Halifax expedition embodied this confidence, representing the finest examples of late 19th century Canadian expertise in surveying, geology, and wilderness survival. Captain William Morrison led the expedition with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 15 years charting the wilderness territories of British Columbia. At 42, Morrison had survived 3 previous northern expeditions, including the harrowing Mackenzie River Survey of 1875, where half his men succumbed to scurvy. His weathered face bore the permanent marks of frostbite, and his left hand showed only 3 fingers, lost to the cold during a blizzard near Fort Simpson. Yet Morrison's experience made him the natural choice to lead the Halifax mission. Morrison's second-in-command was Lieutenant Colonel James Hartwell, a veteran of the Red River Rebellion who brought military discipline to the civilian surveying team. Hartwell was known for his meticulous record-keeping and had authored several papers on cold weather survival techniques for the Canadian Military Gazette. At 38, he was considered the most promising officer in the Northern Survey Division, and his assignment to the Halifax Expedition was seen as preparation for greater responsibilities in the expanding Canadian territories. The scientific component of the expedition rested in the hands of Dr. Marcus Blackwood, a geologist from McGill University, whose studies of maritime coal formations had earned him recognition throughout the British Empire. Dr. Blackwood had spent the previous summer cataloguing mineral samples from the Pictou County mines and believed that similar deposits extended far into the northern wilderness. His enthusiasm for the mission bordered on obsession, and colleagues noted his increasingly frequent references to finding the mother lode that would revolutionize Canada's industrial capacity. Among the most intriguing members was Thomas Crow Feather, a Métis guide whose knowledge of northern survival techniques was legendary among fur traders and government surveyors. Crow Feather had been born near Fort Garry and had spent his entire life navigating the challenging terrain between Hudson Bay and the Atlantic provinces. His inclusion in the expedition represented the government's growing recognition that indigenous knowledge was essential for successful northern exploration. However, Crow Feather had expressed reservations about the Halifax mission from its inception. During the planning meetings in Ottawa, he had warned that the target region was avoided by his people for reasons that transcended mere weather concerns. The Mi'kmaq elders, he explained, spoke of that northern territory as cursed ground where the spirits of winter held permanent dominion. These warnings were dismissed by the expedition's leadership as primitive superstition, but Crow Feather's unease would prove prophetic. The expedition's religious needs were attended to by Father Michael O'Sullivan, an Irish priest whose missionary work among the maritime fishing communities had prepared him for the hardships of frontier life. Father O'Sullivan viewed the expedition as an opportunity to establish Christian presence in uncharted territories, and his letters home revealed genuine excitement about bringing salvation to any indigenous peoples they might encounter. His inclusion also served a practical purpose, as his medical training made him the expedition's de facto physician. The remaining 27 men consisted of experienced surveyors, camp assistants, dog handlers, and specialists in various frontier crafts. Each had been selected based on proven ability to survive in harsh conditions, and most had participated in previous government expeditions to remote territories. Among them were the Brennan brothers, Patrick and Sean, whose skills with the dog teams were considered unmatched in the maritime provinces. There was also Samuel Wright, a cartographer whose detailed maps of the Labrador interior had become standard references for later expeditions. Perhaps most significantly, the roster included Jonathan Morse, a photographer commissioned to document their discoveries using the latest dry plate technology. Morse's presence reflected the government's intention to publish their findings for both scientific and promotional purposes. His photographic equipment, transported in specially designed cold weather cases, represented a substantial investment in the expedition's potential for generating public interest in northern development. In the weeks before departure, several expedition members reported disturbing dreams and unexplained anxiety about the mission. Dr. Blackwood wrote to his wife that he had begun experiencing nightmares about being buried alive in ice, while Father O'Sullivan mentioned in his journal that he felt compelled to perform extra prayers for the expedition's protection. Most troubling were reports from the Brennan brothers that their sled dogs had become increasingly agitated during training exercises, often refusing to head north and howling mournfully during the night. The expedition departed Halifax on the morning of January 15, 1879, under a steel-grey sky that promised more snow. Citizens gathered along the harbour to witness the impressive convoy of dog sleds loaded with supplies for a planned 3-month survey mission. The men appeared confident and well prepared, their winter gear representing the finest cold weather technology available. Each sled carried precisely calculated provisions, surveying equipment and emergency supplies sufficient to sustain the team through the harsh northern winter. The first weeks proceeded according to plan. Morrison's daily reports, transmitted back to Halifax by relay stations, documented steady progress across the familiar terrain south of the Shubenacadie River. The weather remained challenging but manageable, with temperatures hovering near 0 degrees Fahrenheit and intermittent snowfall that did not significantly impede their movement. The dog teams performed exceptionally well, and morale among the men remained high, despite the demanding conditions. By February 1st, the expedition had crossed into uncharted territory, moving beyond the northernmost fur trading posts into regions that appeared on maps only as blank white spaces. It was here that Morrison's reports began to reflect subtle changes in both the landscape and the behavior of his men. The trees grew sparser and more twisted, as if the very act of growing required enormous effort against some invisible force. The dogs became increasingly reluctant to continue northward, often requiring harsh encouragement to maintain their pace. Dr. Blackwood's geological surveys during this period revealed unusual mineral formations that defied easy classification. His notes described crystalline structures embedded in the permafrost that seemed to emit a faint luminescence during the long winter nights. These formations were unlike anything documented in existing geological literature, and Blackwood theorized that they might represent previously unknown mineral compounds formed under extreme cold conditions. The first genuinely disturbing incident occurred on February 8th. Thomas Crowfeather reported hearing human voices beneath the ice during the night watch. According to Morrison's report, Crowfeather described the sounds as speaking in a language he could not identify, yet somehow understood to be calling names of expedition members. When other men were awakened to verify these claims, they heard only the typical sounds of settling ice and wind through the sparse vegetation. Father O'Sullivan's journal from this period reveals growing spiritual unease among the expedition members. Several men had begun requesting private confession sessions, admitting to dreams so vivid and disturbing that they feared for their souls. The priest noted that these dreams invariably featured themes of being lost in endless ice, pursued by shadowy figures, or buried alive in frozen ground. Most disturbing were reports from multiple men of dreaming about people they had never met, who claimed to be members of previous expeditions that had never returned from the Northern Territories. By February 15th, Morrison's reports indicated that the expedition had encountered their first unexplained disappearance. Samuel Wright, the experienced cartographer, had vanished during the night without leaving any tracks in the snow around the camp. A thorough search of the surrounding area revealed no evidence of struggle, no blood, and no indication of where Wright might have gone. His sleeping area appeared undisturbed, as if he had simply evaporated into the frigid air. The psychological impact of Wright's disappearance reverberated throughout the expedition. Morrison implemented enhanced security procedures, requiring men to travel in pairs at all times and establishing a rotating watch schedule that ensured continuous observation of the camp perimeter. Yet these precautions proved inadequate against forces that seemed to operate beyond conventional understanding. 3 days later, Patrick Brennan disappeared while tending to the dog teams less than 50 yards from the main camp. His brother Sean reported that Patrick had been visible just moments before, checking the harnesses in preparation for the next day's travel. When Sean turned back after adjusting equipment on his own sled, Patrick had vanished completely. The dogs remained calm and showed no signs of disturbance, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Dr. Blackwood's scientific rationalism began to crack under the strain of these inexplicable events. His journal entries became increasingly erratic, alternating between desperate attempts to find logical explanations and growing acceptance that they had encountered phenomena beyond scientific understanding. He theorized that the unusual mineral formations might be affecting human brain chemistry, causing hallucinations and disorientation that could lead to accidental death or abandonment of the camp. The expedition's progress had slowed considerably as fear and confusion spread among the surviving members. Morrison's leadership remained steady, but even his experienced confidence began to waver as more men disappeared under impossible circumstances. On February 22nd, 2 men vanished simultaneously while collecting firewood within sight of the camp. Their companions reported that the men simply walked behind a cluster of pine trees and never emerged, despite the fact that the area beyond the trees consisted of open, flat terrain with no concealment. Father O'Sullivan's final journal entries reveal a man struggling to reconcile his faith with experiences that challenged every foundation of his worldview. He wrote extensively about the sensation of being watched by invisible presences and described hearing whispered prayers in Latin spoken by voices that seemed to emerge from the ice itself. Most disturbing were his accounts of celebrating Mass for the expedition, only to discover additional shadows kneeling among the men during prayer, shadows that corresponded to no living members of the group. By the first week of March, only 7 men remained from the original 32. Morrison's final reports, discovered months later in a sealed container buried beneath their last campsite, reveal the complete psychological disintegration of the expedition's survivors. The men had become convinced that they were being stalked by some force that could manipulate reality itself, plucking individuals from existence without leaving any evidence of their fate. Morrison's writing during this period reflected the desperate rationality of a man trying to maintain sanity in the face of impossible events. He documented their attempts to retreat southward toward Halifax, only to discover that familiar landmarks had vanished and their maps no longer corresponded to the terrain around them. The expedition had become lost in territory that seemed to shift and change according to some malevolent intelligence. Dr. Blackwood's final notes, found scattered near the abandoned campsite, consisted primarily of frantic calculations attempting to determine their location using astronomical observations. His measurements indicated that they were simultaneously north of Hudson Bay and east of Newfoundland, geographical impossibilities that drove him to question his own sanity. His last coherent entry described the ice beneath their camp as alive and hungry, pulsing with an organic rhythm that seemed to synchronize with human heartbeats. Thomas Crow Feather had abandoned his usual stoic demeanor and spent his final days chanting continuously in his native language, performing rituals designed to appease the spirits he believed had cursed their expedition. According to Morrison's account, Crow Feather claimed that the northern ice was not merely frozen water, but rather a living entity that fed on human warmth and memory. The Métis guide's warnings about cursed ground had evolved into a desperate belief that they had awakened something ancient and malevolent that would not rest until it had claimed every member of their party. Father O'Sullivan's final confession, written as a letter to his bishop in Halifax, provides perhaps the most disturbing account of the expedition's last days. The priest described celebrating Mass each morning for a congregation that included not only the surviving expedition members, but also the ghostly figures of those who had already disappeared. These spectral attendees appeared as solid and real as the living men, yet when directly addressed, they would fade into the frigid air like dissipating breath. The final disappearance occurred on March 8th. Morrison's last journal entry, written in an increasingly unsteady hand, described waking to find only 3 men remaining in camp: himself, Father O'Sullivan, and Sean Brennan. The other survivors had vanished during the night, without disturbing the carefully arranged alarm system of bells and tripwires that Morrison had constructed around their sleeping area. In his final hours of sanity, Morrison attempted to solve the mystery through systematic observation. He documented the fact that their supplies had remained untouched, despite the disappearance of the men who had been consuming them. The dog teams showed no signs of distress and appeared to be interacting with invisible handlers, following commands that no living expedition member had given. Most disturbing of all, Morrison discovered that his own reflection in a broken piece of mirror showed not only himself, but also the faint outlines of all 32 original expedition members standing behind him in the ice. Father O'Sullivan's final act was to write a complete confession of the expedition's experiences and seal it in a waterproof container along with Morrison's journals and Dr. Blackwood's research notes. His accompanying letter expressed absolute certainty that none of them would survive to deliver their account personally, but hoped that future discoverers might learn from their fate and avoid repeating their tragic mistake. Sean Brennan, the last survivor besides Morrison and Father O'Sullivan, had ceased speaking entirely by March 10th. Morrison's final entries describe Brennan as staring constantly northward, occasionally raising his hand to wave at something invisible in the distance. On the morning of March 11th, Morrison awoke to find Brennan gone, but discovered fresh footprints leading directly into a solid wall of ice that showed no signs of melting or disturbance. Morrison's final journal entry consists of a single line: "The ice remembers everything." Father O'Sullivan's last confession, dated the same day, ended with a prayer for forgiveness and a warning to anyone who might find their remains. "Do not follow our path. Do not seek what we sought. The North keeps what it takes." Spring arrived late in 1879, and with it came growing concern about the Halifax Expedition's prolonged silence. By April, government officials in Ottawa had begun organizing a search mission, though bureaucratic delays and harsh weather conditions prevented immediate deployment. The Northern Survey Division maintained official optimism about the expedition's status, suggesting that the men had likely established a winter camp in the Northern Territories and would resume communications once the spring thaw made travel feasible. The first search party departed Halifax on May 15th, led by Captain Robert McKenna, a veteran Arctic explorer who had participated in the Franklin search expeditions of the 1850s. McKenna's team included 12 experienced woodsmen and 2 Mi'kmaq guides who possessed extensive knowledge of the Northern Territories. Their mission was straightforward: follow the Halifax Expedition's documented route and establish contact with Morrison's team. McKenna's search proceeded rapidly across the familiar southern terrain, retracing the Halifax Expedition's path, using Morrison's detailed reports as a guide. The spring thaw had transformed the winter landscape into a maze of rushing streams and muddy trails, but the experienced search team made excellent progress toward the last known position of the missing men. The first disturbing discovery occurred on May 28th. McKenna's team located what appeared to be one of the Halifax Expedition's campsites, identifiable by the remnants of their distinctive military-issue tents and the arrangement of stone fire rings. However, the site showed no evidence of recent occupation, appearing instead as if it had been abandoned for several years. Most puzzling was the complete absence of the heavy equipment and supplies that Morrison's team should have cached at regular intervals throughout their journey. Subsequent discoveries followed a similar pattern. McKenna's team found multiple campsites that corresponded to locations mentioned in Morrison's reports, yet each appeared long abandoned and stripped of anything valuable. The dog sleds, scientific equipment, and personal belongings of 32 men had simply vanished without explanation. Even more disturbing was the discovery that local wildlife had completely avoided these abandoned sites, leaving them eerily silent and devoid of the normal signs of scavenging or natural reclamation. On June 2nd, McKenna's team reached the coordinates of Morrison's final reported position. Here they discovered the expedition's last campsite, marked by the frozen remnants of a large fire pit and the systematic arrangement of stones that indicated prolonged occupation. Buried beneath a carefully constructed cairn, they found Father O'Sullivan's sealed container, containing the expedition's journals, research notes, and final testimonies. The contents of this container provided the first concrete evidence of the Halifax Expedition's fate, though they raised more questions than they answered. Morrison's detailed reports documented impossible events and experiences that defied rational explanation, while Dr. Blackwood's scientific notes described mineral formations and geological phenomena that contradicted established scientific knowledge. Father O'Sullivan's spiritual testimonies spoke of encounters with supernatural forces that challenged the very foundations of Christian theology. Most disturbing was the complete absence of human remains. Despite extensive searching of the surrounding territory, McKenna's team found no bodies, no clothing fragments, and no personal effects that might indicate where the 32 men had gone. The spring thaw should have revealed any graves or remains that had been covered by winter snow, yet the landscape appeared completely unmarked by human presence beyond the abandoned campsites. Local indigenous peoples, when consulted about the disappearance, expressed little surprise at the expedition's fate. Mi'kmaq elders confirmed that the territory north of Halifax had long been considered cursed ground, avoided by their people for generations beyond memory. They spoke of ancient warnings about travelers who ventured too far into the northern ice, describing it as hungry land that consumed those who failed to show proper respect for its spiritual guardians. The government's official response to McKenna's findings reflected the bureaucratic desire to minimize public concern while avoiding difficult questions about the expedition's purpose and preparation. The Department of the Interior classified the Halifax Expedition as missing, presumed lost to severe weather conditions, a designation that allowed for the payment of death benefits to families while avoiding speculation about supernatural causes. However, several pieces of evidence complicated the official explanation. A letter postmarked from Halifax and dated March 15th arrived at Dr. Blackwood's home in Montreal 6 weeks after McKenna discovered the expedition's abandoned campsite. The letter, written in Blackwood's hand, consisted of a single sentence: "We found what we were looking for, but it was not what we expected." Postal authorities could provide no explanation for the letter's origin or delivery, as their records showed no postal service to the region where the expedition had disappeared. Similar unexplained communications were reported by families of other expedition members throughout the summer of 1879. Thomas Crowfeather's wife received a package containing traditional Métis prayers written in her husband's handwriting, despite the fact that Crowfeather had never demonstrated literacy in his native language. Father O'Sullivan's parish in Halifax reported that several parishioners had received what appeared to be final blessings written in the priest's distinctive script, though church officials insisted that O'Sullivan had been missing for months when these documents were delivered. Contemporary historians who have studied the Halifax expedition face the challenging task of explaining the disappearance of 32 experienced men without resorting to supernatural explanations that would be dismissed by serious academic institutions. The most widely accepted theory suggests that the expedition encountered severe weather conditions that led to disorientation, hypothermia, and ultimately death, with the bodies subsequently lost beneath shifting ice formations or consumed by scavenging wildlife. Dr. Margaret Chen of the University of Toronto's Arctic Studies program has proposed that the Halifax expedition may have fallen victim to a rare meteorological phenomenon known as a polar vortex collapse. This weather pattern can create sudden temperature drops of 50 degrees Fahrenheit or more, accompanied by disorienting snow conditions that make navigation impossible. Dr. Chen's computer models suggest that such an event could have struck the region in March 1879, potentially explaining the expedition's sudden loss of communication and ultimate disappearance. However, this scientific explanation fails to account for several disturbing aspects of the historical record. The expedition's journals describe events and experiences that preceded any severe weather, suggesting that their difficulties began long before meteorological conditions became life-threatening. Additionally, the complete absence of human remains puzzling, as even the most severe weather events typically leave some evidence of victims' presence. Professor David Blackwood of McGill University, a distant relative of expedition geologist Dr. Marcus Blackwood, has spent decades researching his ancestors' fate. His analysis of Dr. Blackwood's mineral samples, preserved in the university's geological collection, reveals the presence of previously unknown crystalline structures that do not match any documented mineral formations. Professor Blackwood's spectroscopic analysis has identified elemental compositions that appear to be impossible under normal terrestrial conditions, suggesting that the expedition may have encountered geological phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. The psychological aspects of the Halifax expedition have attracted attention from researchers studying the effects of extreme isolation on human mental health. Dr. Sarah Mitchell of the Canadian Centre for Mental Health Research has proposed that the expedition members may have experienced collective hallucinations brought on by a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning from their heating systems, vitamin deficiency, and the psychological stress of extended wilderness isolation. This theory could explain the increasingly erratic nature of their journal entries and their reports of impossible experiences. Yet even Dr. Mitchell acknowledges that her psychological explanation cannot account for the physical evidence surrounding the expedition's disappearance. The systematic arrangement of abandoned campsites, the complete absence of supplies and equipment, and the unexplained delivery of communications from expedition members months after their disappearance all suggest phenomena beyond conventional psychological breakdown. Native oral histories provide a different perspective on the Halifax Expedition's fate. Elder Joseph Francis of the Mi'kmaq Nation has shared traditional stories that describe the Northern Territories as a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds becomes thin during the harshest months of winter. According to these traditions, travelers who venture into this sacred space without proper spiritual preparation may become trapped between worlds, neither fully alive nor completely dead. These indigenous accounts align remarkably well with the experiences documented in the expedition's journals, suggesting that Morrison's team may have encountered spiritual phenomena that their Western scientific worldview left them unprepared to understand or survive. The Mi'kmaq tradition of avoiding the Northern Territories during winter months represents accumulated wisdom about dangers that transcend mere physical hardship. Recent archaeological investigations have uncovered additional evidence that complicates our understanding of the Halifax Expedition's disappearance. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2018 revealed a series of underground chambers beneath the expedition's final campsite, chambers that show signs of artificial construction but predate any known human settlement in the region by thousands of years. These structures remain largely unexplored due to the extreme difficulty of accessing them through the permanently frozen ground. Most disturbing are reports from modern researchers who have attempted to retrace the Halifax Expedition's route. Several scientific teams have reported equipment malfunctions, navigation failures, and unexplained psychological effects when working in the Northern Territories during winter months. While these experiences can often be attributed to challenging environmental conditions, their consistency with the 1879 expedition's documented experiences has led some researchers to question whether the region itself poses dangers that science has yet to identify or understand. The Halifax Expedition of 1879 remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in Canadian exploration history. 32 experienced men, equipped with the finest cold-weather gear and survival knowledge available in the 19th century, vanished without leaving a single trace of their ultimate fate. Their detailed journals describe experiences that challenge our understanding of reality itself, while the physical evidence of their disappearance defies conventional explanation. More than a century has passed since Captain William Morrison led his team into the frozen wilderness north of Halifax, yet their story continues to haunt historians, scientists, and anyone who has attempted to understand what happened during those final weeks of winter 1879. The expedition's fate serves as a stark reminder that despite our technological advances and scientific knowledge, there remain corners of our world that harbor mysteries beyond human comprehension. The Northern Territories, where the Halifax Expedition disappeared, remain largely unexplored to this day. Modern satellite imagery shows the same sparse, inhospitable landscape that challenged Morrison's team, while climate change has done little to make the region more accessible during winter months. The few researchers who have ventured into these territories report the same sense of unease and psychological pressure that permeates the expedition's final journals. Perhaps most unsettling is the realization that the Halifax Expedition may not have been the first group to vanish in these Northern Territories. Archival research has uncovered references to other missing expeditions and unexplained disappearances in the region dating back to the early colonial period, suggesting a pattern of loss that predates written records and may extend into the distant past. To this day, not one body from the Halifax Expedition has ever been found. No grave markers dot the northern landscape where they disappeared, no monuments commemorate their sacrifice, and no official explanation adequately accounts for their fate. The ice, it seems, never gave them back, and the Northern Territories continue to guard their secrets as jealously as they did in 1879. The story of the Halifax Expedition stands as more than just a historical mystery. It represents a confrontation between human ambition and forces that exist beyond our understanding, a reminder that some frontiers may be meant to remain uncrossed. In our modern age of GPS navigation and satellite communication, it is easy to forget that there are still places on Earth where 32 men can simply vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions that have no answers and a warning that few have chosen to heed. As winter approaches each year in the maritime provinces, old-timers still speak in hushed tones about the Halifax Expedition and the men who walked into the ice and never returned. Their story has become part of the region's folklore, a cautionary tale about the dangers of venturing too far into territories that were never meant for human habitation. And somewhere in the vast frozen wasteland north of Halifax, the spirits of 32 lost souls may still be wandering, trapped forever in the ice that claimed them, waiting for someone foolish enough to follow in their footsteps and share their eternal fate.